Hello, everyone. This is Christina Barr, and you're watching Black Tea News. Hello. Welcome to Black Tea News. I'm here again. I had my live this morning, but as you guys know, I'm having a special interview today with one of my favorite TikTokers, BoldlyGrowing4ward, and Duncan has such great content, and I'm excited to have a conversation today. So if anyone wants to pop in the comments, we can answer questions, etc. But we haven't I think we've been in a live together maybe once or twice, but excited to have a long form conversation.
Yeah, no, this is gonna be awesome. I'm super excited. Thank you for bringing me in.
Okay, so I think I first started following your content a bit. I think you first started popping up during the pandemic, maybe is when I first saw your content talking about I don't know how much YouTube is still sensitive about this topic, but the tyrannical policies, I guess we'll say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's when I started. The COVID conversation, I think, got a lot of us online for the first time, and yeah, it's where I started, and then it's evolved.
So, your politics, which is interesting to me, because I mean, you're libertarian. Is that how you identify?
Yeah.
As a libertarian, and which people, I guess, found interesting because you were trans and now you're detransitioning, and that's just not something that a lot of people see up front, which I guess it wasn't so weird to me, but I definitely know people who have been on the right and then transition, and then all their politics immediately change. Mm-hmm. So what exactly kind of drew you to your political philosophy, and how did you navigate that with I guess just some of your circles, because you still have a lot of people who are on the left?
Yeah, so I was raised conservative, and in that political ideology, I worked for a newspaper and I busted politicians, and so being cautious and aware has always been nature, right? Then I grew up and I had a lot of experiences, and that brought me more into LGBTQ circles and healing circles, which is more liberal. And so it was comfortable, making friends with people who had dialogue around acceptance and progression and things like that. But then, COVID happened and the sides got really extreme. And so for me, I just don't like being told what to do. I have just a long history of not having someone deny me something, period, just because of the type of stuff I went through as a kid. And so I'm sitting here just looking at the sides get really extreme. I'm just like, well, why are we fighting over who's in charge of the hammer? Why don't we just take the hammer away? And so that landed me in libertarian, where I'm just willing to listen to both sides. And ultimately the end goal is, let's not give the government more power than they need to, which is right-leaning libertarian, right? But I also believe in bodily autonomy for a lot of progressive ideology.
So the ideology is essentially everyone sucks.
Yeah, basically. I mean, don't tell me what to do. Don't even try. You know what I mean?
I'm very hard right. I can say that I'm very frustrated just generally with my side, I guess. Just the ineffectiveness, sometimes the consistencies, and people are like, just come over here. I'm like, no, I'm pretty hard on. So no, but I definitely agree that so much of government sex, which is really interesting, because so many people complain about it on the right and really on the left, but once they get their guy in charge, it's a lot of that just
we're fighting over who gets to use the government for their beliefs, and people can't get out of that. They are just obsessed with it. And what happens, you've got these campaigning people and big tech and things like that, that'll get people all riled up and go, here's this thing to be afraid of. And then politicians are sitting there sucking at the teat, ready to go oh, I can stop that. Vote for me. And then as soon as you said, you get your guy, oh no, we're cool. Politics is the best thing that ever happened to the planet. Right. until the other person gets it. And now they're heated again, right? And I'm a root problem kind of person. So rather than like fighting over, it's like toddlers, right? Take the toy away. Stop letting them fight over the toy and take the toy away.
So what was it about, I guess, the pandemic? Because you actually have a, I guess you said this on TikTok, so maybe this isn't, you can let me know if I'm over some bounds, but you said you had a child who was injured vaccine?
Yep. Our first child received a vaccine injury, and we went through the same thing all the other parents do, right? You go to the pediatrician and they go, hey, this is what the expectation is. And then there was an injury. And that's when we started learning, you know, that the pharma and manufacturers, they're basically protected. There's no level of accountability for it. And in navigating the medical freedom community, you know, you just learn about all of these insidious aspects that are normal, that people don't question unless something bad happens to them. And so because of the vaccine injury, the COVID, you know, vaccine and all of that started coming out, and people were just like, no, you got to do it. You got to do it. I'm just like, but there's people who have adverse reactions and you're not giving them a choice. And as soon as someone takes a choice away, that's when that's when my rough side comes out.
Yeah. It's amazing how I heard stories of people who were like severely allergic to even the things within the vaccine and they still wanted them to take them. Like, oh, we'll just give you an IV drip, like slowly into your system. I'm like, that's why go through all that? That just seems like a lot to do to a person. You could just like an exemption.
Well, and like as part of the medical freedom community, there's a lot of people with autoimmune disorders. And yeah, that's what they were saying. They'd go to their doctor and they'd be like, well, if there's an adverse reaction, we'll just hook you up to this and pump you full of this. It's just like, or we could just like not and just, but doctors gaslight and all that such. And it was a wild evolution the past couple of years. And a lot of people's underbellies showed. And I'm surprised at how quick a lot of us have forgotten the past couple of years.
I'm surprised. Like I saw, I guess I want to say it's Good Trouble, but maybe it's one of those guys on TikTok who was going after. I think they're making a video about millennial Spike Lee and asking like, "Did you get vaccinated? Did you get vaccinated?" And I'm like, why are they still pressing about this? Because I'm like, there's a lot of information that's come out now, and I'm like, obviously people who didn't do it, maybe you thought they were dumb at the time, but didn't they kind of win out like they won the lottery or won the game? So I don't understand still this aggression that's coming from people.
Because they want to be validated and told that they did the right thing under the right circumstances. So my job is it's in a very highly blue, I live in a red state, work in a blue state. And I noticed that with my coworkers, as soon as they complied and, you know, did whatever medical choice they felt was necessary, coerced, they stopped paying attention to everything else, right? And so they're now joining this conversation of just like, well, I mean, we did it because we care about people. You know, they're still at this like superior morality thing. And at this point, it's not about the facts, it's about the motivation. And because that's how the woke activists typically operate is it's about the content of your character based off of our definitions, right? That's the only energy they have left. And I don't like you. I don't get it. Like,
well, I understand having that bit of virtue, and then you don't want to have been proven wrong after you were so gung-ho about you believed you were right, you had this virtue. I did a video pretty early on, especially like there was information that came out later about vaccines recently about how I guess they didn't really look that much into how they spread and stuff. But I remember very early, there was an article, it might've been from the New York Times, Washington Post, like a big one that said that you can still spread it. And after that, I was like, how can you have virtue about this issue and feel like you can coerce people into it when you can still spread it? Like in my opinion, my mind, I'm like, all of your virtue is gone from this. You're not right. For me, you're doing it. It's admirable for you to do it for you. Don't tell me you're doing it for me.
And that goes to a psychological thing, right? It's a leverage, you know, the virtue signaling and social media and all that really drove that. And I see it on both sides, but I can go on about that in a deep rabbit hole. Just the psychological effect of it, right? Stockholm syndrome. And then, oh, Lord forbid my level of accountability is I admit that I was an asshole. Instead of just, acknowledging, oh man, yeah, like I did this and like it was rushed. Sorry. No, we don't want to say sorry anymore, right? That's accountability, and people in a world of convenience don't want accountability. And it's not even a matter of right and wrong for me with vaccinations. It's the pressure and guilt and shaming that got me, because I was raised by a narcissist. And so once I saw people start going, you're a bigoted white supremacist if you don't get vaccinated, I was just like, whoa, now. Now we're just pulling in whatever we can just to abuse somebody and get away with it. And when you look at the psychological motivation behind that, it's a superiority complex. And I don't like that.
Robert Malone, who was on the Joe Rogan show talking about the mass formation psychosis, which I mentioned that on TikTok on my main account. That was the last time I was at the For You page on that account. That's when I got like shadow banned.
Yeah,
and I've been ever since. But people came out against that phrasing, but some of the people who like signed on to like a letter denouncing it, like wrote stuff denouncing it, wrote papers about the psychology of needing mass people to support the vaccine. So I'm like, no shame whatsoever on this topic.
What this whole thing did to me was it showed that boundaries don't matter no more across the board. And, I get from a conservative mindset, the right-leaning mindset, they're all about boundaries, arguably. But whether this is intentional or not, I think that might be where my struggle kind of is because I'm starting to learn that a lot of what drives big tech, which we all operate online now, right? Because isolation forced us all to no longer have a conversation at the water cooler. It's all online. What I'm learning is that there's a bunch of third-party campaigning companies that big tech uses and politicians use to strike up these key talking points and get people riled up. And so even today, I'm really struggling taking a stance over the right or wrong aspects of it, and pointing people's faults out or their maybe problematic behavior that is what I would call abuse. We're not allowed to do that either. And so how do we operate or get out of this cycle? And that's where I really focus on being in the middle of these politics, right? It's about listening and seeking to understand where they're coming from, not about right or wrong. Because when you do right or wrong, fear is the motivation every single time.
So would you say that anyone like in your circle, as far as like COVID or other things, kind of came around after in hindsight, or no?
I've had people be less aggressive about it. My coworkers, Heavy Blue Company. I mean, they were like that. I never made my medical status private, but I was very vocal. But they're starting to come out and just go, yeah, this should be a personal choice. There is risk, and I have to bite my tongue because I'm sitting here going like, well, I've got receipts where like you called me kind of a piece of shit. But we're not going to talk about that. And I've had a few people go, well, you need to take the high road and we need to get to a better place, right? Which is a total gaslight move, right? Like, no, you need to get over it. Like, I'm over it, you get over it. Nah, you said some pretty harsh things, man. Like, we're going to talk about it.
Yeah. No, you should, it is a gaslighting tactic. Just forget about it and telling us to let it go. And if it was reversed, people wouldn't feel that way either. So yeah, but it's important not to forget about that kind of stuff. It's funny, like after January 6th, I was talking to some people and they were like, oh, we're so upset. I'm like, I'm gonna do nothing. I'm like, y'all let people lock you in your houses. Like, you guys are, I don't want people to do, like, don't give me the wrong, I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression, but I'm just like, people are just so hyped. And I was disappointed with so many people that were just ready to just lie down. And it really concerned me how people from across the spectrum were just willing to give up their liberties and their freedoms.
And both sides will do it depending on where they stand under the boot, right? My favorite conversation that happened after January 6th was a very, very liberal friend of mine was like, our democracy was seconds away. Like, I was about to go grab my shotgun and go fight for my country. And I'm sitting here going like, all right, so let's take the identity politics route. Like you hear yourself, right? Like you feel comfortable knowing that you can bring a weapon to go defend your rights, right? It's like, yeah, I'm like, right. Say it slower. So you agree then?
Yeah.
And the cognitive dissonance, just the complete disconnect of, no, 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 I'm doing it for the right reasons. They're not. Okay, got it.
So you're going through a pretty big change right now publicly online. How I saw a video talking about how many days you've been in transition. So were you transitioning while not kind of openly saying that you were transitioning?
I mean, I transitioned. Detransition. Yeah, no, I was navigating a lot and changing my appearance in the same time. But, you know, I ultimately went off hormones, which I would say that's the line with detransitioning, is going off the medicalization. And I didn't tell people probably till like 6 to 8 months later that that's officially what it was. And a lot of that was rooted in when you identify as a trans person, people, an entire side of the political argument will listen to you. As soon as you don't identify as that, you know, you lose any type of stance you can be heard in. And what's frustrating for me personally is if I don't use buzzwords and I just describe how I feel about things, both sides will nod their heads and agree every step of the way. As soon as you use a buzzword, they're like, whoa, 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 no, like that's the other side's thinking and all this other shit. And so that's why I spent so long announcing it publicly, was just like, I still need people to listen, to understand. And as soon as I gave that away, I gave up, you know, a whole bunch of things. And it is what it is. It was a difficult place for me to navigate, but ultimately it was about people need to be aware that it's okay to change. It's okay to take a step back and do something different and evaluate.
When you say that people will listen and you would give something up, do you mean that on the from people on the left and the right?
Well, yeah, I could say both sides. It's interesting. When I transitioned, I had overwhelming support from my liberal friends, and then my conservative friends were just kind of like, all right. I mean, now that I've detransitioned, it's completely switched. I have overwhelming support from my conservative friends, and my liberal friends are like, you're trash, leave. And that's where I've landed it. Like, for most people participating in the conversation, we're nothing but talking points. And that's where I'm trying to really get people to understand, is like, there's a very human experience going on. And there are a lot of factors, regardless of how one wants to define what happened, it's still a human experience that people are undergoing. And using people as talking points to drive political mechanisms, it's not right. To me, it's not right, which is, you know, really reinforces my more libertarian beliefs of just like, hey, let me go live over here away from you. But people want to take their beliefs and shove it into someone else, which is why we start aligning with the stupid parties, right?
Well, I guess I asked about the right and the left because I mean, I know when people can be like, this is our person, you know, they uphold like, this is our Black person, this is our trans person, they say these things on this topic, look what they say, they don't like the drag queen. So because you fit in this box, and the left does it too. I mean, the left really does it, but the right doesn't think about how they do it, but they definitely lift up certain people on a pedestal to say, because they believe this particular mouthpiece has more legitimacy to say a certain thing.
I mean, there's definitely pick me energy across the political spectrum. And I've been called that plenty of times from both sides, right? I'm sure you've gotten it too. And all of that just reinforces that moral superiority, gaslighting, abuse shit that I'm sensitive to, because that's what I was raised in. So that's why I'm like, all right, so we're gonna talk about the psychology. I don't care about right or wrong and speculation. We're gonna talk about like the behavior that's happening, and people do listen to that piece.
Yeah, it's funny because people tell me all the time, like, well, you can say these things because if I say these things, a white person will say, if I say this thing, then they'll call me racist. And then I'll just look them dead in their face and I'll say, okay, but they'll call me an Uncle Tom.
Right.
And then there's like an awkward staring as they're realizing, like, I'm taking the slings and the arrows. Like, I don't need that. Like, I will do it, but it would be better if we all stood beside each other saying the same thing, because that's how like you get all these folks who are maybe a very vocal minority, but they seem very powerful and loud because no one will stand up to them.
Right. And what I've learned is that is completely on social media. In real life, that's not the energy, because in reality, both sides tend to be pretty spineless when it comes to direct confrontation, because we do have empathy deep down inside most of us. But when we're digital, when we're behind a screen, all that goes out the window for both sides. But I can have a conversation with either one in person, and I can challenge their thinking, and they listen, because I don't know, maybe too many of us were raised in the day of like, got punched in the face if you said the wrong thing. And the younger generation, they spend 80% of their life online. That's why their communication is toxic and overwhelming and very driven by algorithm.
Yeah, I went to a Juneteenth celebration last year, and I had just regular conversations with people, and most of the people I assumed there were, on the left, but we had normal conversations, and they actually didn't want to get rid of the 4th of July and all this rhetoric that you kind of hear online. And they're like, yeah, I want to celebrate Juneteenth, but I don't want to get rid of 4th of July and all but it's not like the activists that say all this kind of radical stuff. And it softened my heart a bit, but I'm like, there's still normal people in the world, even though they might not agree with you politically. People make more sense than what we give them credit for.
Exactly, right? It's that safety net of online people. It's a psychological thing, just to like pay attention to. I'm friends with a lot of people, both online and digitally, or online and in person, and I can see the behavior change over that safety net, and it's wild to me. For work, I mentor every year. I mentor like these 9th graders in this marginalized school to help them stay motivated to remain in high school and stuff. And the teachers were telling me that like that age group, they don't know how to communicate in person at all because of isolation and all this other stuff. And so as I approach these conversations, I do really prioritize like online, I'm either fighting with a robot or I'm fighting with someone who just is completely in their delusional state of safety. That's not worth my time. Mm-hmm. What is worth my time is going to my opposition's places. I don't even want to call it opposition, just people who are very heavily motivated by their beliefs and just seeking to understand and present how I feel about my interpretation of their beliefs. And most people are open to that because most people want to help somebody through a thought process, minus online.
Yeah. So what did drive you essentially to transition in the first place?
So it was a lot of things. And at the time versus now, I had two different lenses to look through. So at the time, I had I had a PTSD flashback, essentially, in a very triggering situation that was completely innocent. And in that, I opened the lid to just all this trauma that I never dealt with. And in doing so, I was like, oh, there's this part of me that's like, I don't understand them. And I was a manager at a company, and one of my reports had transitioned, and I was so infatuated with it. And I was impressed by the bravery and all these other things. And so as I have this PTSD moment, there's this part of me that I don't understand. I looked to what I admire with bravery, and it happened to be a trans person that I was friends with. And so as you have those conversations, the overall guideline is, oh, if you feel this way, then that's what you are, explore it. And so that's the path I went down. Now that I have processed and dealt with a lot of things and really sat in how I felt prior to transition, during transition, I had developed a personality because I have borderline personality disorder. So I had developed a personality that was mine, for the first time mine, and it was catered after my abuser because I didn't know how to deal with the trauma. So it's a very deep rabbit hole that it's very difficult to unpack in a therapeutic climate, because insurance companies say, if they're coming in and they say they don't like their body, then you need to solve for that. But they don't say you need to solve for the rejection of their body, right? And it's a completely different line of thinking, all just by changing the word from affirmation to rejection.
So you didn't feel like you got any sort of therapeutic help in or opposition to transitioning at all?
So interesting enough, when I went through that early stages, my therapist was on maternity leave. But even if she hadn't been, I don't think she would have challenged it. Cause you know, when I finally saw her a few months later, I was like, yeah, so like I'm Rebecca now. And you know, I had a justification behind why I felt like I was really, you know, supposed to be a woman on the inside. And it all makes sense on paper to the right people. And so she never really challenged it. And I don't have blame for her in any way, shape, or form. She's a lovely person and she helped me with sobriety and all these other things. But she also, like, after I detransitioned, I talked to her and I was like, would you have challenged me? Like, would you have like went after my trauma? And she's like, well, you know, the thing about trauma. And so she wouldn't have. Just 100% wouldn't have. And a lot of therapists are like that. And it's not necessarily their fault. Insurance companies dictate the treatment plan. And then, as with anybody who's in some sort of mental profession, their personal stuff is going to get involved. And so like, hey, I'm a genuinely nice person and I'm a therapist and I see this person struggling and they say that this makes them feel better. So I'm going to affirm that because the goal of me as a therapist is to help them make them feel better. My goal as a therapist is not to challenge whatever the hell makes them feel better unless it's toxic. And no one thinks transgender is toxic in the therapy community. Well, I shouldn't say no one, but the majority don't, right? It's a really weird place.
That's interesting. So someone the other day on my comments had mentioned that there's chemicals in your brain that make you trans. Is that what?
No. So,
because I did. I'm like, so did they look at your? Because I knew the answer was no. But I'm like, so did they look at your brain? And they're like, no. I'm like, if there's a tell, why wouldn't that be the way they diagnose it?
So what they're talking about is essentially a hormone and synapses firing thing that they measure. And they can go, this brain fires this way and it's predominantly female. This brain fires this way and it's predominantly male. And so they're taking that logic and applying like, oh, well, see, it can happen. There is a difference. You know, but most of them don't get their brain measured, right? It's not a common thing. And what I've often run into is most trans people absolutely beg for the diagnosis of, shoot, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it's where it intersex roughly minus the organs. Like you just have a hormonal imbalance where like you have the right organs, but your hormones say you're this, and it's only like 0.5% of the population. It's a really tiny number, but trans people just like, they beg for that. Because that would make sense. That's something measurable that they can show up with hard data. And so, yeah, they're going to go on to a study that says this type of brain is female and this type of brain is male. So, it's not necessarily all about the organs. And that's the drive to using that argument. It has nothing to do with like reality. And just because that's how we've measured it doesn't mean that that's how it really is, right? Because there could be an entire spectrum to how our brains operate, particularly now that we have an extremely toxic environment, right? Like there's fluoride in our water, like water makes the frogs gay, like that's all a thing, right? But that affects how our biology and neurology is working, and we haven't adjusted for that yet. And so we are using a very narrow spectrum to measure this stuff. And yeah, the trans activists are using those limited measurements to justify their argument. And that's fine for them. But for me, what I ultimately asked myself after listening to a lot of people who are very anti-trans, well, what made me a woman, right? How do I know what a woman thinks like? How do I possibly know that? And I didn't have an answer. All of my answers were misogynistic stereotypes, right? Oh, it's soft and compassionate and like they like these things and those things and those things. And you know, I was talking to a bunch of anti-trans people and they're just like, but like that's not unique to women. That's just unique to a personality. And I was just like, okay. So trans people are reinforcing negative gender stereotypes. And I had to sit in that for a long time. And that's ultimately why I started unpacking to ask myself,
that's interesting you bring that up because I've definitely had those conversations with people. Yeah, so that's interesting to hear that you had a thought process behind that was, I guess, challenged by that.
It was, yeah, and it was down to, for me personally, right? I'm a root problem solver. If I don't have an answer, I can't stand on my 10 toes. I didn't have an answer. So then I just unpacked more and I was like, well, shoot, it makes more sense to just be an effeminate man who is into things that aren't part of the male gender roles. Like that makes way more sense and it's way less stressful. So that's the route I went.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this. I mean, I guess a lot lately because it's a lot of conversations. But if you feel a particular way as a man, it doesn't mean that you're a woman. It just means that men are capable of those feelings. So
And
maybe we just need to give people permission to have more space in those feelings.
And that's exactly it. I honestly, probably my strongest space where I thrive is helping men through mental health, because the reality is that men still aren't allowed to be in a spectrum of feelings, right? There's this expectation, and I don't want to call it toxic masculinity because that's too simple of a term, but it's, you're the provider. And if you're anything less than that, you're trash, right? And when you think about the generation of feminists and women who are very about self-empowerment and, men aren't the only breadwinner, they have rejected men in the patriarchy so much to the point where men basically damned if they do, damned if they don't. And so, yeah, a bunch of them are going to go, well, I'm feeling these feelings and men aren't supposed to feel those feelings. So therefore I must be a woman. When really, if we broke down those men need to operate in this specific level, otherwise they're not a man, break that down, and we don't have to have a transgender conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there is a particular pressure on men, especially like whether it's societal or just kind of, I don't know, built in about that hunter-gatherer provider thing, and like the pressure on a family of not being able to provide. There's been men who's just walked away. Not, and I'm definitely not endorsing that, but I mean, whether it's modern times or people doing that at the height of like the Depression, just not that pressure of not being able to provide for their family, that shame, they just couldn't take it, whether they take it out on themselves with harm or they just get up and walk away. So yeah, there's definitely a lot with men who can't share their feelings. And then like I did a post or something not too long ago about how I think society is cruel to men, and people are like, oh, these men, they need to toughen up, and some people are, get feminists angry. You had like boomers who were angry, and I'm just like, and it stirred from a conversation about a man who their girlfriend aborted his child, and that's where the conversation was stemming for, because he was upset about it.
Right.
And everyone's telling him, you have no right, get over it. And I'm like, that's his progeny. And I'm like, well, he's not even allowed to have feelings about that.
Right. The patriarchy and breakdown of the nuclear family. I mean, there's a lot of things wrong with that, but you could definitely tell when a political party took advantage of that. And that's where you see what's happening right now, and it's almost pushing men back into a place where they're not allowed to speak. And so that's where I take my really very passionate stance of just like, listen, let's not worry about the gender boxes for a second. Let's worry about men who has the highest unalive rate of any other demographic. And it's because of pressures from society to meet an expectation. Like there's no give. I mean, yeah, sure. There's bad men and there's bad women and there's bad children and there's bad, there's always going to be bad. But to say, all deserve to be punished because of the minority or whatever the case may be, that doesn't make sense. And even then, a lot of men have toxic masculinity as a result of abuse from mothers or fathers, right? Mental health is still not the priority to address these things. What is the priority is to figure out labels and groups and how to have politicians put mechanisms in place. But the mental health industry isn't there to solve for that currently. And so for me, that's the one place where I'm like, okay, that is where I do want the government to push in. They need to stop protecting insurance companies. They need to let the mental health industry actually help unpack all of this generational shit that we're at this pinnacle right now of learning new language to communicate it, and men are dying to do it. But then you've got older generations, or I don't want to say like conservatives as in the political party, but more conservative and reserved mindsets going like, no, this is the way it's always been and it should be. And it's like, well, no, we're at a place where it's not anymore.
My dad, he's a crier. So he's, it's you're a Star Trek person, so you'll appreciate that. He's more like his side of the family, he'll say, is like Klingons, and my mom is like the Vulcan.
Oh,
So
sure.
so they're just, you know, they're different people, but they really, you know, mesh well. But he's still very masculine and macho. But like he'd watch. You ever seen The Patriot with Mel Gibson?
Yeah, yeah.
With that scene when she was like, "Papa," just here. Or if you mention his dad, he'll start crying. But you know, still very masculine. It's okay to, you know, to show your feels, to be, you know, vulnerable, but you know, still be manly and get stuff done.
Well, right. And that's what I walked away with my whole transition detransition story is just all of this is a spectrum that as soon as we take away the box that things are supposed to belong to, you become an overall better person, more connected with rationality.
So what do you think really drives the the push for, I guess right now, the transgender movement with, I mean, I see money, there's ideology and politics, and I think there's the three. If there's one I'm missing, but what's your assessment on that?
Based off of my woke circles, I would say the majority of the drive is literally just to be anti-conservative. which is, it's bizarre. It's bizarre to me because like I recovered from an abuser and I'm sitting here going, okay, so even if you're anti your abuser, you're still giving your abuser power. And so like, I know a lot of people are just like, I'm just going to be this way because it drives the conservatives crazy. I'm like, why are you doing that? Why is that your motivation? And so then they start doing the mental gymnastics to justify and all of that stuff. I think that pharma does take advantage of vulnerable people. And they offer medicalized solutions. And I'm talking more than the transgender conversation, you know, antidepressants and all of that stuff like that. That's definitely a large component. And yes, there are conservative benefactors and liberal benefactors who are lobbied by pharma, right? And so that is why you don't see that line being drawn at a political level. Instead, we're going, oh, well, we're going to enforce banning things for people. We're going to reduce liberties for people instead of taking away our lobbied money. So yeah, I would say those are the two big motivations, anti-conservative and the fact that like pharma sees an opportunity and they control so much.
So I mean, what about Biden? And I mean, his picks have been, I mean, Rachel Levine being like the assistant health secretary, especially after like what happened with COVID in Pennsylvania. It's crazy. So it's totally a diversity hire.
So I challenge the diversity conversation in a lot of places, including hiring demographics of people based off skin color and gender and all of this other stuff. And what I've noticed is that the woke people, it's all about the superior morality, right? No, we're willing to give up something of ours to give someone marginalized an opportunity. And that sounds really great at the surface level, but when you really like listen to the words, what they're saying is this person's lesser than me. And so, yeah, let's give them a shot because like that makes me a better person. And that in of itself is a very toxic mindset because you can, like, a diversity hire is it's not a good hire. I'm sorry, it's not.
He's got a in front of him, man. Our health secretary doesn't have any health background. And our press secretary is awful. Jen was, I didn't like Jen Psaki, but she was better. So I mean, he's got quite, but his policies are very, very radical as far as the gender front. And it's, what's the political playoff? Is, you think he's just like playing to a base and ticking off the conservatives? Is that just the driving factor there?
I think the Conservative Party has struggled since Bush Jr. The Conservative Party is very easy to split. And I think the Democratic Party, particularly Biden, are taking advantage of that. And they're going to go, all right, so we're going to convince people the moral superiority is the way to vote. You're a piece of trash if you don't. Look at us doing it. And that drives the Conservative Party more and more in half. And I genuinely think that that's his motivation, is to get y'all so divided over something that it is nearly impossible to argue moral superiority. Like, you come from a religious background, it's very easy to get in that mindset, and it's very difficult to argue with someone who has landed there.
So divide as far as what you mean, like people who are not as hard right but just want low taxes versus people who
Exactly. You know, like y'all can't even get, I honestly want, like, I have a lot of conservative friends, so I mean, like, y'all in a derogatory way, but just like, even the candidate to represent all of y'all, you can't get aligned with, versus the Democrat Party, they're on top of that shit. They're like,
well, they're man, that's something they're very good at, and they're very like good at recognizing the appropriate person at the time. Like Hillary thought she was going to come in 2008, paid her dues, was stand by her man, all that stuff. She got her own experience as a senator, etc. Here comes Barack Obama, and people are like, well, we got to support the black guy, you know,
right.
not just because he was maybe a lot because he's black, but he just had a different energy behind him, you know, and so they went with their golden moment, and he is their icon. They have not, you know, an icon that has it. I mean, people really liked Bill, but you know, something reminiscent of probably their Kennedys and stuff. So they got a rock star, and they just recognize the moment. But Republicans, everyone wants their moment themselves. So
Right.
it's fight, and I see that so much locally. It's crazy. Even like small positions, people will fight tooth and nail, and even stuff like, I want to be this is just an example, but like, I want to be the Republican youth chair or something. And I'm like, why do these races get dirty and so personal? Like, it's not even a paid position. Like, you just see the craziest stuff in local politics.
And where I think the real crux of that is that people who do that believe that the government is there to enforce beliefs. And that's where I take my libertarian stance of just like, nah, man, like, stop thinking that your beliefs need to be what the government should be protecting or enforcing. You get rid of that and you get rid of shit candidates.
So that's interesting if you think so much. I mean, I guess my theory, at least as a lot of this stuff is politically driven, is that if you keep elevating a lot of the LGBT stuff, it gets to a point where it's so, I mean, I guess we talked about this a little bit before we went on air. It gets to the point where you can't really protect religion and shield it so much. And so much of their opposition is that hard conservative right religious folks. And if you start doing stuff that takes away a bit of those protections, you start to kneecap them in a lot of places, I think. So that's where I guess I was thinking a lot of the political play goes there.
Well, and from a psychological standpoint, how everybody views something like rights. One, our Bill of Rights isn't conclusive, right? We all start taking into things that we feel we're entitled to as a right. But when what you feel is your right and that you're entitled to it gets challenged in any way, what we do naturally is that we think something is being taken away if our opposition gets something. Like, that's a childlike behavior that we don't really evolve from. And so that is the easiest way I can describe the past 10 years of politics is, oh no, they're getting their way, and so I'm losing something. Instead of just acknowledging, oh, well, they're getting their way and it doesn't really affect me. But then they start doing the mental gymnastics to spiral down that rabbit hole of just like, if they get this, this is being taken away. My ability to walk the earth and not be bothered by people like them is being taken away. It's like, it's an interesting way to make someone else's situation about you. Well, not you, but first person.
Well, I mean, I guess I understand. I guess example, I mean, the Colorado Baker thing, for example, I mean, as my position is people should be allowed to do what they want to do and don't bother people who, I don't see why you want someone to make you a cake who don't like you anyway. So.
Well, and that's the thing is believe it or not, I am very protect beliefs, right? Or make it to where you have the liberty to enforce your beliefs. And so I do support a private business being able to go, I can't support that. And there are so many other alternatives, but we get so fixated on that one, right? Because if there's one, it could be 100 more. Fear takes over and we start going, oh, if this one got it, no, now 10 years from now, it's going to be everybody. That's the fear. We inject our fear into one person getting their way.
That's true. That's true. But yeah. So I guess that's where but you could be right that a lot of it is just about taking off the conservatives and seeing how they move on stuff. Because I mean that's there have been leftists who've written articles about like critical race theory, and that's why so many people on the left push it. Like, people will say we have to support it, and I'm like, do you even know what it is?
Right.
And like I saw Brian Cranston talk about it the other day, like we need this in the schools. And I'm like, I thought it wasn't in the schools. I thought you guys didn't want it in the schools. I thought it was a college course. And I'm like, are you guys aware that it says that racism is just the run of the mill, how things operate, that white people don't have any incentive to change the system, and even if you do something not racist, you're probably doing it because you're racist and it just helps you in the long run. So I'm like, you're injecting all of this, anti-white attitudes and also like an oppressed sort of mentality on minorities. And Scott Adams said something that got him canceled. I don't know if you followed that story at all.
Mm-mm.
You know the Dilbert guy?
Yeah.
So he found out that there was a Pew Research put out a poll that said, no, it wasn't Pew. It was Rasmussen. Rasmussen. You know what I'm talking about.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Asking, is it okay to be white? And so I was relieved that a majority of the country said it was okay to be white. But then when they broke it down, it was like nearly, when you added up Black people of saying it's not okay to be white and the people who said I'm not sure, which I would chalk up not sure to moral cowardice. I don't want to think the worst of people like that. But if you combine them, it was almost half.
Right.
So he said if half the Black population, and I think a lot of this was to get conversation moving. He said if half the Black population thinks it's not okay to be white, he said that's a hate group. He told white people basically just stay away from Black people. And so people got so angry at him, and like Dilbert got canceled in major comic book and major newspapers. He said his non-Dilbert stuff got canceled from his publisher. He said his agent dropped him. So he's like done as far as, I guess, a lot of his stuff normal coming in for his income. But he was asked about why he said what he said, and he said there's a price that's really high for free speech, and I decided to be willing to pay it. And he said, I think other people can have these conversations now. And but I'm like, his conversation is just the byproduct of the things that people teach.
Right. And what I noticed about the race conversation, right? Work in a very blue company. We started all the book circles right after George Floyd. Sent in way too many. That white guilt thing, right? I when you ask, what's the motivation of the Liberal Party versus the Conservative Party, that guilt trip, man, that ability to take somebody and just be able to be like, you're a piece of trash because I say so. You get a high off of that. I don't know if you've ever like abused somebody. I used to be a mean person. Like, you get a high off of that, and that's where a lot of the race conversation really circles around, is that a lot of what's happening right now is more about revenge as opposed to solving real problems. Like, I don't find a problem with having the conversations with the book circles and learning about systemic issues. I don't have an issue with that. What I do have an issue with is to basically go, by default, you're this. Like, for me, I went to a school in Arizona when I was in like third grade, fourth and fifth grade. I was one of 11 white kids in an all Indigenous and Latina school. And I was bullied ruthlessly because I was the minority in that school. And so like from my lens, I can see that. And I can see that, you know, kids who didn't know any better took it out on the stranger. Right. But then to sit there and go to all these circles and go, you need to feel guilt because of how you were born, something completely out of my control. My stance on that is very different than most of the woke people, in the sense of just like, no, you're not going to shame me for something out of my control. It's not going to work that way. Like, you don't know nothing about me.
Yeah.
And they won't listen to that, because it's all about that manipulation and that abuse that they can justify.
Yeah. I don't know. I think talking about systemic stuff, like people on, a lot of folks on the right are like, there's nothing systemic in place today, et cetera, on law, on the books, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And I guess mostly accept that. But I'm like, if you look at how our politics right now, I'm like, how can you say there's not something systemic? But I just think a lot of the people pushing the systemic stuff are the people who are pushing the systemic racism, actually. You know, there's a book called Communism and Common Sense, and there was a former, have you read it?
I haven't, but I've heard of it. It's on my list.
Okay. But Manning Johnson used to be a communist, and he'd talk about how they would recruit Black people. I mean, this was a long time ago, so they had legitimate racist concerns, but they would prey on that and recruit them into communism. And, you know, instead of Black people being able to, you know, kind of forge your own destiny, they'd be like, no, you shouldn't buy that. You shouldn't all get together and buy that hospital. That's silly. You should make people give that to you instead.
Right.
You know, and they would recruit people into communism, and nothing about like your loyalty to uplifting the Black community could supersede communism. And if you wanted to get out of it, they would set you up, make sure, I don't know, you slept with some white woman who was keeping tabs on you or something. That they'd have some kind of way to ruin you if you wanted to leave. But I think there has been like systemic stuff, at least maybe not some laws and stuff in the books, but psychological stuff that's played out generation through generation. So I think people on the right are missing some really big conversations that we could have with each other.
I think the aspect that the people who say there's nothing systemic and we're all responsible for our own destiny and all that stuff, I think the part of the conversation they're missing is the reality that we are still in a generational trauma place right now. A bunch of us, right? Particularly brown families. You know, there was so much that happened just 3 or 4 generations ago that it impacts the family unit, and then that builds into everything else. That is a systemic thing. It's just whether or not there's a person in charge of that systemic thing. That's where the disconnect is, because that's where the woke go. No, all white people are in charge of all the systems of oppression. Well, no. Systems exist that we all buy into. But when we start trying to find the scapegoat to blame them at, instead of looking at how to heal from it or deal with it, we're not solving any problems. And that's where my stance is on the CRT thing, is like, I get it, but that's not going to solve the problem. It's just going to create an additional problem. Versus what really needs to happen is generational healing and learning how to have better language around all of that stuff. That makes more sense, because then you get stronger family units, and then other things happen. And yeah, it's going to take a couple generations to do that. And we're in a very raw spot still, where, just like I said, 3 generations ago was Jim Crow. Like people haven't left the earth who experienced that. And so they drive a lot of these conversations.
Well, I don't know. It seems like people a little bit younger than that drive a lot of those conversations nowadays.
It's true.
But because I mean, I know a lot of people in my dad was born in 57, so but people like in his age, or even people a bit older, they don't seem to have the same kind of like animosity that people like my age or a bit younger have about today. And they just kind of look at like, guys are wimps or something. Like, you don't appreciate the challenges that we've had and where we are today. So they just come off like really ungrateful, and so many people feel entitled to like a new sort of ongoing pain. I'm just like, it's not, you didn't earn this pain that you're holding on to so tightly. Like other people, yeah, but like the people in San Francisco want $5 million for reparations. Like, for what? For what?
You know what I really think that is? I think that, you know, every generation, right, they get to that 20-ish range, This is new to them, but it's not new to the people who went through it, and it was slightly worse. That's why it's hard to see progression for a lot of people. You know, if you were to say, let's look at 1940 versus 1960, 70, 80, 90, 2000, you can see that and measure the progression. But the newer generations don't look at that. They go, oh, this is fresh to me and I'm all heated and I just learned about all these things that I can get upset about. And so we're repeating this cycle instead of looking holistically. And that's my problem with liberal arts colleges, is that they look at a victim mindset as a priority instead of a success mindset as a priority.
So I got a question. Some time ago, you mentioned something about you would do some kind of outreach for LGBT stuff, and they were always obsessed with putting trans stuff in it. Mm-hmm. Why? Oh, do you know why, or did you ever work that out, or?
Because the oppression Olympics is a big deal to them.
Why particularly drag though?
Why are they obsessed with keeping drag around? You know what? That's a lot of people's livelihood at the end of the day. It really is. When you think about LGBTQ folk or people who don't present within the gender norms, there is discrimination that happens. So like, there's a couple of jobs that I lost out on because it's because I was transgender. My name was Rebecca and I was identifying as that, and it made them uncomfortable. Right. And so, you know, those people who present and do things, they still need a living. And a lot of them end up being in the performative arena, which is where drag shows really are. And so their passion is the majority of people who get their income as that performance that's being challenged. And that is a place where I do really struggle, particularly around legislation around drag shows. I get the kids thing, but at the same time, I've been to appropriate and inappropriate drag shows where kids were present, and they are dramatically different. Now, do I think the community should do a lot better at vetting and putting the right safeguards in place? Absolutely. But when you start talking about Tennessee, where it's illegal to fucking perform at all, that's not okay. That's taking away someone's livelihood and liberty.
Are you sure it's at all, or just like in
anywhere public? So if they were to go to Pride, if a drag performer was to go to Pride and literally just be dressed up while dancing, right? That's within the realm of that legislation. And that's a really tricky place.
Did that pass yet, or that's still going?
It has not officially been signed into it, but I think it's bipartisanly passed.
I wonder if there'll be any amendments. I've heard people talking about. I have to read it. So the stuff with the kids is just weird. I like the the library. Do you have an opinion on the library stuff?
Drag shows in libraries? Mm-hmm. I mean, someone dressed as Snow White reading a library book about Snow White, which is what most of them are. If people think that that's sexual, that's 100% on them. But being exposed to somebody who is trying to break down a gender box, that isn't the problematic piece. The problematic piece is where people start projecting their sexualization. So for me, my form of trauma as a kid was I was hypersexualized. I was groomed. I did witness terrible things for 10 years. And my mom got me exposed to adult sexual things starting at 12 years old. So like, I understand the damage and outcome of it. But that being said, it's not an all or none thing. And people taking that stance without any exposure to it, I really struggle with them participating in that conversation, right? I would rather see people challenge their own lanes than people cross their lanes because they have no exposure and all they saw was a snippet and then projected their fear and their own internal stuff. Here's the thing. Here's a really hard truth, that if you thought that something looked sexual with a kid, say it slower, you imagined something sexual with a kid. And people don't realize that that's what they're doing. It's just like, the left going, oh, like brown people are marginalized and they deserve it, when it's inadvertently racist. Well, it's the same thing on the other side. If you're imagining a lot of scenarios where kids are sexualized and they in fact are not, You're having those thoughts. You need to deal with that. But going and yelling at people isn't you dealing with that.
Well, well, you said it's people's livelihood, so I guess I understand people doing it for clout, for cash, for promotion within that community. I mean, that makes sense. I'm not okay with it, I guess, but I guess my thing would be like, why a drag queen? Why not a local author? Why not someone who's an entrepreneur? Like, because you wouldn't get a go-go dancer or stripper or so, other people who do like adult sort of entertainment stuff. And there's, like you said, there's people who do stuff that's raunchy and stuff that's, I guess, not. But why not someone else?
Well, and that is happening. There's a lot of libraries who are going out of their way to, normalize their own beliefs within their community. But isn't that kind of the point of, that smaller government, smaller community thing? Your local area should represent the people and whatnot in that area accordingly. And so if you're in a primarily progressive place and you're like, oh man, the youth need activities, you're going to tie those things together to represent the people in your area. But that does not necessarily mean that applies to a completely opposite state or city on the other side of the spectrum, right? And that is where I really do struggle with people overgeneralizing the conversation. But I've also seen very reckless parents purposely bring their kids and expose them to that just for the sake of like, my kid's gonna love everybody. Okay, but there's going to be an outcome. For me, after I've sat in this conversation a long time the past couple of weeks. That's why I stopped making content, because I needed to sit in it. Everyone is fighting over what should be banned and not banned in order to protect kids. Okay, I get that. I'm a parent. I get that. One, you can't protect everybody, right? So it's all about calculated risk, and there's predators who will take advantage of any situation where they can get away with it and be protected. However, to sit there and randomly point fingers based off of discomfort, that's where I draw my line, right? For me, I don't think the solution is putting systems in place that might prevent a child from experiencing something, because people are just going to work around it. People evolve, like things like that. What makes more sense to me is to make it to where if a child experienced something that in their up until the age of 28 determined that it was a trauma for them and it created a diagnosable thing from a mental health standpoint, go after the abuser, go after the person who caused it. So when you think about parents who are letting their kids transition too early or exposing them to drag shows and things like that, fine, kids can come back at 28 years old and sue them for the trauma. Same thing can go for parents who kick their kids out because they're gay, parents who abuse their children with religion. So instead of nitpicking over whose beliefs need to be protected, empower the kids to actually go seek damages as the result of a traumatic upbringing. That makes more sense to me.
Well, I think people discussing what needs to be as far as legal or what legal, people could be overstepping their bounds as far as that goes, but as far as people having conversations about what society as a whole should just, I guess, find permissible in a moral sort of sense, that's where debate is. But I mean, you're introducing something that's, I guess, something I thought about and something I've heard, but if so much of the pushback is we just want to rebel against the other side, then the more you push, the more radical then you'll probably get from that extent too.
Exactly. Like that's just a circle rabbit hole that there are no winners. We all lose.
Mm-hmm. Did you see the drag Christmas special where they are interviewing the parents and someone said, well, there's simulated sex in there. And they said, well, my daughter sees simulated sex all the time in school. I'm like, what? I was like, what do you mean she sees simulated? I'm like, I hope that's not true. Like, but I think she was just saying stuff because I think they interviewed people before the show and I don't think people really want to have those conversations afterwards, but
well, and kids parrot what they hear from adults. They just do. And so who knows what the real context was. My kids say all kinds of things they hear. They put it in kid words, you know? So yeah.
how old are your kids?
11 and 7.
I want to say pretty young.
Yep.
Pretty young. Okay. I'm probably so weird looking over the comments. I'm trying to see if there's a good one to answer people had. I think we kind of, oh, my dad is calling me because he didn't pay attention. Yeah, I love him to pieces, but sometimes he'll call me when I'm doing my live. I'm like, I go live every day at 4:00. Why are you calling me?
It's consistent, bro.
It is consistent, but you know, you know, it's good to have parents who care. You know, he would call when I used to work in the Michigan Republican Party. He would call me when I got there. He'd call me like during lunch. He'd call me when I left. And some people are like, I'm like, it's good that people know where you are, so you're not kidnapped.
It's better to have that than not have it.
For sure, though, it's annoying, but I love the pieces. So, what do you think about the TikTok ban, particularly? Because I mean, we're on the app, got decent followings on it. I don't have as much love for the app as I used to because I think the app doesn't treat its users very well. I've seen takes like Facebook is pushing it. I've seen takes like they don't want us communicating, which I don't think makes sense because the algorithm keeps people pretty much separate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I work in cybersecurity. I have for a very long time. I can tell you that if you think about all of the data that is captured by that app, that is a huge security risk. It really is. Like we do have foreign enemies that are using big tech to infiltrate us. I genuinely do believe that that's what this is. I think all the other stuff is people just trying to find a reason to be passionately justified in their passion. But I do think based off of the data that it captures, it is a huge risk. Like they could literally map out where important people are, where decision makers are. They can reverse engineer login information. I could do that. I could watch enough of your videos and probably figure out a password. So think about China having access to that uninterrupted. And that's like the one thing that like when Trump tried to go after that, I was like, hell yeah. But then, everything else happened.
Yeah. I struggled with whether I was going to jump on the app or not. Because I think that was like pretty much when he was talking about a lot of the risk and so on. But my sister's like, you'll probably do so well if you go on there. And I'm like, well, they're on it. So they probably have all of her information anyway. So I just opted to do it and it worked out well for a while anyway. And I guess I wouldn't mind so much that it was gone, again, because I just don't feel like they treat their users very well. But people are saying they think Zuckerberg and stuff was behind the push. And I'm like, well, that totally does make sense to me. If I was Facebook or YouTube, I would totally be advocating like this is a security threat. Get rid of them because they're big competition.
Well, so Instagram and YouTube are both under the umbrella of Meta now, and they have been for 3 years. So that's as far as you and I are concerned, that's the same company. Which is why it does make sense to go down that rabbit hole of like, oh yeah, they're pushing out their one competition. TikTok's not competition for either one of them.
I guess that's true. And YouTube's been changing different stuff as far as their shorts and stuff. So I think it doesn't seem like they're banning content. Like there's stuff on YouTube that I put on that would not have lasted at all, like 5 minutes on TikTok. So I think they're coming back as far as like a better app to me anyway. So, but if they wanted to lobby against them, I mean, I thought that would make sense. Like, so I saw a video of someone talking about it, going down this huge rabbit hole. Like, did you know these companies hire firms to lobby to politicians? Like, what cave have you been living in? Of course, people do that. Someone reached out to me a couple months ago trying to offer me a job like that, or at least an interview for it. I mean, people do get companies to lobby. That's just lobbying.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is people need to realize if this is a free app, if an app is free, they're getting their money from somewhere. Like that's like it costs millions of dollars to operate a server farm. Like it's not run off prayers and hope. Like it's run off of dollar bills, which comes from advertisers, which the easiest thing to get engagement with, which is what the motivation is to be politically diverse.
Let me ask you this, because you don't have a dog in the fight because you're libertarian, I suppose. So in the great war of Trump and DeSantis, do you have a preference? Because it's either one of those two are gonna. I mean, you could vote for either, I guess. But
so here's the thing. DeSantis makes an amazing governor, and I think that he can do more ideologically beneficial things for the Conservative Party as a governor. I also think that he definitely does things to the extremes to cater to his groups. There's some things like the newest thing that is it's not being proposed by him, but like I have seen him be romantic about it is if you are a transgender parent and you have a kid and they seek gender affirming care and the other parent is against that, it empowers the state to get involved. That's setting up for open discrimination. Like, it's stuff like that if that was at a federal level or since we can just like write and make up mandates and shit now, once you're president, that's dangerous to me. So I would love to see him continue to be the governor. I don't think Trump or Biden should run at all because we will all lose no matter what, because it's going to get, it's like figuring out which parent we get to live with after the divorce. Like that's basically how it's set up. We're fighting for the soul of the nation. Right.
Oh my gosh.
Like neither one should run.
I can't believe that people just, I guess I shouldn't say I can't believe, but it's just disappointing that he got away with that line. I'm like, this is a man who his vice president said he kept me from integrating from schools, who lied about participating in the civil rights movement. And he's like, we're going to save the soul of the nation. He said I wasn't black, bruh. Right? I'm sorry, go on.
No, you're right. Like he's, I can't stand a single word that comes out of his mouth. Even the coherent three of them. So I was actually pretty, I wouldn't say like Trumper, but I was pretty pro-Trump in the sense that he was getting a lot of, it may have been for selfish reasons, for his own personal gain, but he was getting us separated from foreign dependency. And I'm all about that, right? However, as I have looked into things recently, like Ghislaine Maxwell's actual trial testimony, Mar-a-Lago is involved. And so I'm sitting here going like, well, I can't back that up now, right? Because that's an entire ring of people who've been protected. And there wasn't a witness who said they saw Trump doing something, but Trump was like, he knows what's going on. And he gave Jeffrey a pat on the back for being successful at it, right? So I can't support either one. I would love to see a more reasonable conservative candidate go forward. But I swear, if 2024 is California versus Florida, we're all going to lose.
Talking about Newsom versus
DeSantis. Like the most extremes on the, no, ma'am.
If it's not Biden, I really think, I think the best person on their roster would be Gretchen Whitmer. I mean, unless you like pulled out a Michelle or something like that. But I don't think Michelle will run unless, I don't think the Obamas have anything really to gain. And I don't think that they would really put her in unless they just knew it was going to be a slam dunk.
Right.
So I know people talk about it, but I don't know about that. But I think she just won by a lot in her reelection. She's Midwest governor. And she's a female. I just, check those boxes,
Well, that's like I voted Joe Jorgensen the last election, right? She met most of my criteria. I was fine with it. Diversity.
So, yeah, I don't know.
I I would love to see TikTok get banned before 2023 is over because of the 2024 election.
Okay, sorry about that. My plugged in my computer and it just went all.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if it was me or you. All right.
Oh, I guess it was me. I had some an issue with the internet before we, like right before we started. It started flipping out, and then I was like, I'm gonna have to use my phone Wi-Fi, and then I got the Wi-Fi working, and then I plugged in my computer, and then it was like it was before, and I'm like, all I did was plug in the battery. So, but anyway, I believe that's all for now. I don't think there's any more. I see some people like Trump in the what all the way in the comments. Do you think he's going to be indicted tomorrow? By the way, you think that's just a big rumor? You do?
No, I think he will.
You think he will?
Will anything come of it? No.
I said today I thought it would be interesting if Biden pardoned him, because then he could immediately take the high ground and then hold that over Trump forever.
Oh,
And then
100%.
that would take the wind out of Trump's sails, like as far as being the victim. And then if they were on a debate stage, Biden could be like, I already pardoned you, sir, for your porn star, you know? So, but I just don't think that, I think so much of this is to punish Trump for even running in the first place. So I don't think that he will do that. And plus, I literally think that Biden thinks they can get away with anything. So it wouldn't matter to him.
I basically, if I see a headline, I immediately look towards like the shittier news outlets to see what else is going on. So yeah, I think tomorrow is about something else. I mean, it'd be cool to see the headlines afterwards, right? No matter what happens, someone's gonna get passionate.
Yeah, but I'm telling everybody, don't go to New York and protest. It's a trap.
Oh, 100%.
I keep posting Akbar memes like it's a trap.
Like I participated in a lot of 420 protests. It's a trap. Oh, this is where all the dealers and stoners are gonna get together. Oh shoot! Well, let's pull out the cameras, guys.
Yeah, don't do that. Someone's like, you don't speak for the president. He said protest. I'm like, enjoy your little cell if that's how you feel.
I mean, if you just pay attention to how they treated the January 6 people, I mean, no, those are all political pawns.
Yeah, so, and he's not gonna bail you out. He's not gonna get a lawyer for you. Just do what's best for you.
Yeah.
Protest won't help him anyway. Okay, can you tell the people where to find you?
Yeah, TikTok, Instagram, BoldlyGrowing4ward. I spelt it there. Yeah, I just kind of make somewhat controversial content, but I try to approach things from the middle, try to understand both sides, because the reality is we all have to figure out how to live together, whether we like it or not. That's a reality, unless we're talking about genocide. So and if you're going to do that, say it with some chest, so I know who you are. You know what I mean?
Well, you did a really good job explaining your political philosophy with Star Trek. I don't know if that video is still up somewhere. You should put it on YouTube.
I love that one. That was so fun. And that was a challenge from a woke person. They're like, you need to talk about capitalism and how awful it is. I was like, bet.
But yeah, we used to come home from church on Friday nights and watch Star Trek. So I was like, oh, very excited to hear.
You're like a huge Trekker.
I guess I'm not the biggest, but I mean, like Next Gen, that was our family time together. My dad called First Contact the last greatest movie of all time.
First Contact, really?
Yes.
He's got good taste. He's right.
He's right. Because we were having a conversation about movies, and I think we were talking about like Pirates, how it was really good. It was a great movie or whatever. And he's like, great. He's like, you think that movie was great? And we're like, well, what's great to you? And he's like, the last greatest movie of all time was First Contact. And we're like, so that's just like a favorite quote for us for all time now.
You know what my weakness is Voyager. Like Voyager was my
Janeway. That's how my mom would say.
Oh yeah.
My mom. I mean, they watched it all, but she didn't love Janeway. They really liked Deep Space Nine.
Deep Space Nine, I think, is one of the most well-written sci-fi like shows of all time. It is so deep. Like it addresses trauma in like so many ways. Like my friend got me hooked on it because I didn't watch Deep Space Nine until like 4 years ago or 3 years ago. And she's like, yeah, no, every episode is about overcoming trauma in like your past and PTSD. I was like, no, it isn't. And then I get like halfway through, you know, all of it. I'm like, all right, well, this is my new therapy now. I'm cool.
You got quite a few nerd things. Because you got Groot in your background, you got Star Trek, you got Star Trek.
Yeah. I got Groot. I got some Star Wars going on over there. I've got Voyager. I've got Voyager. I've got The Office. I'm a bigger Office fan than any other thing. Like, I don't know if that means anything to you.
I've seen a lot of Office episodes, not because I have sat down to watch The Office, but I live with someone who has the DVDs and watches them nonstop. So I've seen a lot of The Office, but
I've seen it 74 times.
That could be a real number. People really do rewatch that stuff a lot.
It's my comfort blanket.
I think that's what it is for Katrina too. She knows she's gonna laugh at this episode, that spot, and sometimes you watch stuff so you just don't have to think too hard about it. You just want to sit and enjoy it. I mean, I don't watch a lot of new stuff myself, so I get it.
Every couple months, I try to make like an Office video, like take clips of The Office and relate it to politics. And like every single time, even I get heated, like making it in the sense that just like, oh man, this is too fucking accurate. So yeah, one day I hope to like actually follow through.
I kept wanting to make a Joe Biden Scranton Office video. I should do that sometime, but I just never got around to it.
Oh my God, he makes a really like good Michael Scott analogy, doesn't he? Or Creed. No, he's more like Creed.
Tina, do you think Tina? I think no, that's Sabrina's favorite character. My sister's in one of my sisters is in the chat. Oh, we went to a Star Trek orchestra. Actually, she just mentioned it in the chat. I'm like, yeah, we did that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
It would be fun.
Yeah, they had it in downtown Detroit, so we got dressed up, went down, to the theater, and they just played the music, and they had clips from stuff from the series. So it was really, really awesome.
Like Weird Al did something like that for his final tour, which really wasn't final. And it was like the coolest thing I ever like was part of because I'm a huge Weird Al person. I play the accordion just because of him. So yeah, no, I love when they like take orchestra and put it in cool stuff.
Don't you think he should play the Super Bowl?
Weird Al play the Super Bowl? Be interesting. No, because I don't want my boy attacked by the reckless people. No, he needs to.
By the reckless people? You mean like internet criticizers?
Yeah, no, he's too good of a person. No, don't do that to him.
I feel like so many people like Weird Al. How could he be controversial and it'd be really, really fun? And I assume not to it wouldn't be raunchy or anything like that.
I mean, just look at like Rihanna's criticism where she was like dancing around sperm or whatever.
Yeah, I think he would be a lot more across the spectrum that people will like. I think people like.
My favorite thing about Weird Al concerts, because I've been to probably like 15 of them, is that like you see multiple generations go like full commitment. Like they're all dressed in the muumuus and everything, and like that's a very diverse group of people.
I guess we have a consensus in the chat that Biden is like Creed.
Biden is Creed. It's fair. I think it's fair. I think you should do it. I think you need to grab Creed's best clips, Biden's best clips, mix them together. I'd support it.
You'd support it?
Yeah.
Who's Kamala?
Who's Kamala?
Yeah.
Kelly. And only because of the ditzy side of it, I haven't heard Kamala finish a sentence yet.
She does. She just circles the same part of the sentence, and then she just restructures it back. So it's like it's like a boomerang instead of it being like an actual complete thought.
I think the funniest video I've seen in the past 2 weeks was like Ben Shapiro had the Kamala impression person giving him critical feedback. Did you see it? It's like, you got to get in there low and let the maniac come out. I laughed for way too long. It was uncomfortable.
Did you watch her critique, or do you watch his reply of the critique?
Both. It was gold, pure gold.
Yeah. Well, at least someone helped him with his impressions, because they're not very good. I couldn't have lived with Bernie being president just because I can't stand his Bernie impression.
I think if he was president, if he didn't sit in a chair with muffs in cold weather, I think it'd be a waste, you know?
I agree with that.
What's funny is like most of my libertarian friends are like super pro Bernie. And like when you ask them why, they're just like student debt. I'm like, okay.
Your libertarian friends want Bernie?
Yeah, most of them do. And I'm like, all right, we can all have our opinions. That's cool.
Would it be worth it in the long run for that? Okay.
No, we should keep voting in people who are on borrowed time. I think that's a brilliant strategy.
Okay. Okay. Well, at least I don't think him and a lot of these people, we won't see them too running again like that, because they're up there. There's new people to be on the roster. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you everyone in the chat. I guess we're going into like nerd territory. I guess we can just talk about that stuff offline. But
I'm telling you, you bring up nerd stuff, you get them out of the woodwork. It'll solve most of the problems. I'm just saying. Until politics get set aside when you bring up Star Trek.
Maybe Star Trek. Other stuff, there's people who would like to interject politics and others in especially like comic books today. It's crazy. But anyway, thank you guys for joining me. We're gonna call it a night. God bless you guys. And you can join me at 4 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. And thank you so much, Duncan, for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, dear.